Hi and welcome. This time on a weekly reflection, I would like to talk about climate and the environment actually. And this is something which I've been, kind of not involved in actually as well, but very interested in for a long time. Like, okay, how do we make the world better, but also like how do we make the climate itself better and work in a way that it needs to work. And one of the things which I thought I would kind of talk about today is like there's this problem with that climate and environment are two different things which people kind of confuse and aren't really aware of that they are different. Well, what I mean with that is that especially for example when it comes to food is that you can talk about climate and then you can talk about the environment. And often when you talk about the environment of food, you think about like what is called organic in English, or in Swedish you would say ekologisk or kravmärkt, or in German bio food in that sense. And the problem here is that those two can actually be very much in a contradiction to each other. This was apparent for us already when we started Risk with Fruit. When we started that company, we kind of realized that okay, people confuse these because with rescued fruit, the ambition was to save as much fruit as possible. Like how can we not create food waste, or how can we take potential food waste and turn it into something which can be sold? And the questions we got, especially in the beginning when we talked to people, was like, okay, but then this juice or marmalade, what we had, that's organic as well, right? And we were like, no, we save food waste. Like we don't actually care so much if it's organic or not. Of course we care, but like we want to save it even if it's not organic, just as much as we want to save it if it's organic. And like it kind of showed that okay, wait, this people assume everything which is good from some kind of like environmental side is good in all kind of ways for the environment. And I think this kind of is becoming more and more obvious now that that's not how it works. Like, and actually, especially with food, a lot of the things which are good for the climate are not really that good for the environment, which creates a problem. So, for example, you can have, like in Sweden, you can have the example that, like in general, if you want to have food which is good for the climate, you should avoid meat. Why? Because meat is kind of by itself inefficient, because you first need to grow the vegetables or the vegetations or the soy or whatever you feed the animals with, and then they need to convert that into muscle mass, which becomes meat, and that's a very inefficient process. So just because of that, you actually need to grow a lot more food. But that can, for example, be that in Sweden you have certain fields where if you wouldn't have cows there, you would probably have forest instead. And that's actually bad for the biodiversity. So you actually want to have cows on those fields because then you have a higher biodiversity. You have more bees, you have more like animals, different kind of insects to live there. So from a biodiversity perspective, you actually want to have cows. But from a climate perspective, you don't want to have cows because you got a lot of methane, you get more carbon dioxide emissions, and those kind of things. So like it becomes really complicated very quickly. Like, okay, what's good for the environment, but what's good for climate? And this actually also shows like in the political movement. Like we have we have political parties. It's really relevant, really obvious in Sweden. In Sweden, the Green Party is called Miljöpartiet, and Miljöpartiet is in the name it says like environmental party. So that means that of course their voters are very concerned about the environment, but they're also concerned about the climate. And in a lot of ways, as these two are contradictions, that makes it really hard to make kind of decisions internally. And it's similar. I'm involved in another Green Party which is called Centerpartiet, which is green to the right in that sense. And there's similar problems there as well. And it's similar in other green parties in Germany, etc. Because, for example, a lot of the green movement comes from being against nuclear power. You don't want nuclear power. But if you look at it from a climate perspective, nuclear power is probably one of the best solutions. Like you can get a lot of power, very efficient and super clean from a climate perspective. Super clean from a climate perspective. Not super clean from an environment perspective, even though it's actually more cleaner than you would assume. If you haven't, I would recommend Googling deaths from nuclear versus deaths from other power sources, because then you might realize that actually nuclear power is fairly safe. It's not definitely not non-dangerous, but it's fairly safe in a similar way that, like, flying is very safer than driving a car, but we are afraid of flying. We are not afraid of driving a car. But if you look at the number of deaths, it's actually not that bad. So it's these kind of issues which crop up, like, okay, if we want to be good for the environment, we cannot also automatically be good for the climate, and we need to choose, and we will be in more and more situations in the future where we need to choose, like, is it the climate or is it the environment we care for? And of course the best solutions are both, but that's not that often that actually will happen, especially not for you as a consumer and your choices. If you buy groceries, should you buy organic groceries? From climate perspective, quite often organic groceries are actually worse for the climate. They're more inefficient, they require more land area, they might require more fertilizers. Not that good for the climate, but very good for the environment. So yeah, this is something to think about and to reflect upon yourself. Like, if you need to choose, what do you actually choose if you need to choose between the climate and the environment?